know. We will go ahead and get started. So we'll get started. Once again, we'll thank everybody for being here today. Can we go around just like real brief introduction so we all know who's who? We'll start on my left down at the end, and we'll go this way and go around.
Hi everyone, I'm John Lyons, Senior Program Manager for Public Schools.
Hi, I'm Sarah Miller. I'm a parent of a first grader at Winslow Elementary School.
I'm Deanna White. I'm the Director of Planning and Real Estate for the district. I'm Kirsten Cowan. I'm the Real Estate Manager for the district.
I'm Eric Girding, Senior Project Manager for the Lakeland High School Replacement Project.
Randy Crystal, Senior Director for the Office of School Modernization.
All right.
Mike Bruce, Chair of
I'm Angela Jarvis Holland. I'm the Executive Director of Northwest Disability Support, and I also sit on the Bond Accountability Committee.
I'm Gary Holland. I am a board member. Yes. And committee chair.
Julia Edwards, board member and committee member.
Roseanne Paul, Board Member. Amy Constance, Board Director.
Kenny Young, Chief Operating Officer.
I'm Carol Bradshaw, the Executive Assistant for the board, and we do have our students represented for the DNC on virtual page.
Awesome. You want to introduce yourself?
I've already.
Hi, my name is Barney McMahon, and I'm Cleveland's Cleveland High School student rep.
Awesome.
Oh, I'm also deputy student rep as well.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, so we will start with the ADA transition plan. We'll let Dan go ahead and introduce that.
Yeah, I'm going to take just a couple of seconds. So you have the ADA transition plan on the agenda tonight. That is intended to go before the board fairly soon for adoption. So in your packets, you've got a few materials, including the draft plan, and tonight we're going to do a short presentation. And with that, I'll turn it over to John Lyons.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to walk us through our transition plan. I'm going to be co-presenting with the amazing human being sitting to my right, Sarah Miller. So as she mentioned, a PPS parent of a first grader at Peninsula. So Sarah's going to jump in and talk about some specific accessibility, features that we want to discuss, but also amend where I fumble or fall short. So, yep, will do. Okay. So this afternoon we'll discuss the proposed sequence of the district's ADA transition plan, as well as accessibility at the district more generally. On this latter point, and as foreshadowing, I want to really foreground that accessibility for the ADA is only part of the complete accessibility picture for our students. You can see our work for the ADA transition plan at pps.net/accessibility. This includes the draft plan, as well as an index of all the barriers district-wide, as well as a summary of our engagement work. So looking at the outline today, we'll first talk about the accessibility gap at Portland Public Schools. We'll discuss the regulatory background of the transition plan, the requirements of the transition plan, and then we'll take a very important bird walk to discuss inclusive play spaces, which I think will help really illuminate the extents of federal accessibility, but that is the ADA. And then at the end, we're going to talk about the transition plan phasing and timeline. The underlying message here and my goal for today is that I want to widen our view to a deeper dimension of accessibility because those two are not synonymous. So just a reminder that our buildings are very, very old. The average primary construction date for district buildings is 1944. Looking at where 88 falls within this sequence, only about 9 buildings were constructed after legal protections for students with disabilities existed at all. These standards, 1991, were then updated in 2010. So, based on the strict compliance, we only have 6 schools in the district that meet ADA guidelines. 100%. So 91% of district buildings were constructed before the ADA. 24 district buildings need elevators. We have over 1,600 documented barriers, and to fully transition the district, it's an estimated $69 million hard costs. So then talk about the regulatory context for the ADA. So the purpose of a transition plan is to transition a public agency into full compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. Programs could be made accessible in one of three ways. We can move programs, we can move students, or we can modify the architecture. And we'll talk about this third one primarily today, modifying architecture. But it's worth noting that we largely meet the mandates of the ADA by the first two, by moving students and moving programs. And I just want to highlight here that that's not in line with district values. That's not desirable, but it's what we do in the absence of a barrier-free district.
You might add a little context to that, and I'll share more as we get through the presentation. But for example, we live in North Portland and we're right across the street from Columbia Park, and our daughter is a zone for Peninsula Elementary School. My husband and I feel like it's really important to send her to her community school because, you know, you go to the grocery store, we live, like I said, across from Columbia Park, we bumped into other kids that are in her first grade class, our daughter's first grade class, in the park. It just, that extension of the school extends beyond the school and so far into your community. And if you know that you're going to be sending your child to a school that is not within that community, you not only does the family and the child miss out on that social extension, but I believe also that the community misses out on the benefit of having a diverse population as well.
Thank you, Sue. So then looking at the requirements of a transition plan, we need to identify barriers. Again, those can be found at pps.net/accessibility. We need to establish a schedule to remove those barriers, and we need to do community engagement, specifically with individuals experiencing disability. To do that, we connected with Community Vision, FACT Oregon, and the Oregon Council of Development of Disabilities, and we held 3 virtual town halls last year. We also put a public review of the transition plan with a comment form, and we conducted Spanish language interviews.
I'm sorry, was that community engagement like just invited, or was it we're having an open house?
Yeah, it was 100% open. So what we did is we had the organizations that we just spoke about. They broadcast on social media. They did their email listservs. We basically leaned on them to help us reach the community.
I can add a little bit because I was on the receiving end of the experience as one of the community members. I was actually alerted to the town halls through another parent who invited me to join. Her daughter went through the Sabin School District and is in high school now, also a wheelchair and power chair user. And because my daughter was so young, she was like, you know, your daughter's at the perfect age, you should join these calls. And so I joined the calls, and that's where I met John. And they were really interesting. There's just such a deep body of work that was shared, and then there were quite a few people. I'm not sure exactly how many. I feel like it was about a year ago. There were 2 or 3 calls that John had hosted and shared the progress of the work that he had already done, and then asked for extensive feedback. And there were it was a very diverse group of people representing a wide range of disabilities. So, you know, my experience as a daughter who has muscular dystrophy is very different from a child who is autistic. And so John did a really awesome job of sort of collating all of that feedback together to capture the highest level themes that could bring the greatest benefit to all kids on the playgrounds.
Yeah. So the resulting kind of phasing structure from that engagement work is what you see on the screen here. So main level accessibility is what we'll address first. Phase 1 and 2 are covered within the 2020 bond. And then we're going to look to future bonds for phase 3 and 4. We're going to return to the phasing and timeline at the end of the presentation. So I'll just ask if you want to dive in deep, just hold those questions for a minute and we'll come back to it. I promise. One thing we want to talk about today is during the engagement, we surface many conversations around physical supports that our students need but are not addressed in the Americans with Disabilities Act. So today we're going to talk about playgrounds, but we could easily talk about any of the things that you see here. So restrooms, acoustics, and broadly access. We'll touch on access a little bit. But I really want to contextualize the ADA within these things. And I can talk a little bit about the history of the development of the ADA, maybe shed some light on why that is. But it's really critical that we put the ADA in context of a wider accessibility conversation. So here, ADA is really just a small portion of the conversation we need to be having here. So we're going to talk about inclusive play spaces as an example. So what the ADA requires for play spaces is an accessible path from the building or parking lot to the edge of the play area, and then an accessible path from the edge of the play area to the equipment, then surfacing that complies with this standard indicated here. There's nothing about the equipment itself that needs to be accessible.
I'm going to ask, is this presentation, I'm not seeing it in the, or am I missing it in the committee materials?
It wasn't submitted as part of the committee materials.
It'd be great.
I can
get
share
that.
it, yeah.
I mean, you've got a lot of great information here, and I'm like, should I be writing notes, or is it?
I'm happy to share it right after.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep. So I want to talk about this space. So this is Cooch Park, just east of Metropolitan Learning Center. This play space meets the guidelines of the ADA. Bark chips, believe it or not, are ADA compliant. And beyond the bark chips, the ADA really concerns itself with the path that's highlighted in red here. So this park is managed by Portland Parks and Recreation. I think they understood the gap in their community and what the federal standards were addressing. So they undertook a design effort to make a radically inclusive playground on this site. These are some preliminary sketches. Today, the playground looks like this. And it's really wonderful. If you've been there, you know this. It supports all types of play for to accommodate a wheelchair user and anyone else. It's just fun for everyone. So this is another photo of Anna and Abby's yard in Forest Grove. So you can see, like, not only is this great for kids, but also provides access for caregivers as well. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah and let her introduce Magdalena.
So this is my daughter Magdalena. She's about to celebrate her 7th birthday on December 19th. She's very excited. She's going to have a science-themed party. She's super into chemistry and science right now. We just got her new microscope. She's in 1st grade at Peninsula, which I've already mentioned. We just started the enrollment process for her in the Talented and Gifted program. And the community at Peninsula is really wonderful. She's very well supported through the special education program there. And we've had a really wonderful experience so far. She has a form of muscular dystrophy. So she's very weak and uses a power chair, which is what you see her in there, while she's outdoors or traveling far distances, and then uses a manual wheelchair while she's in school at Peninsula Elementary. She's our only child, and as a result of the experience I've had as a mother who experiences physical disabilities, I have found myself in a place of advocacy, and I'm also a board member of Harper's Playground, an organization that focuses on making the world more inclusive, one playground at a time. So thanks for having me here. And this is a video of Magdalena playing on the playground at Peninsula Elementary a couple of weeks ago. Because Magdalena doesn't swallow, she goes to school with a nurse. And so I asked her nurse if she would take some video footage of her, because I know that she doesn't play much with other kids on the playground because she can't get physically to them. The barrier of the wood chips that John described makes it really hard for her to get to the space of the structures. And even when she can get to the play structure spaces, she can't actually do anything once she gets there. So what happens on the playground comes up a lot in conversation at home, prompted by my daughter, not me, where she's telling me, what she's doing on the playground and kind of what happens because kids want to run around and get on swings and climb on play structures and things like that, and it is free play. So it's funny when John and I were preparing for this presentation, we just had her IEP on Monday night, and her first grade teacher shared with us, not only in her IEP, but also in our parent-teacher conferences, that there are some concerns about her socially because of this barrier that happens on the playground. And it actually prevents her from being able to make really strong social connections with her peers because this is supposed to be a time of free play. And so if it's not structured, then kids are going to do what they want to do, and they're 7 years old, so they're not thinking about necessarily extending inclusion at this point in their social development. So my daughter has made up a game that she plays by herself with a hula hoop and a wiffle ball to help pass the time. Other times she has come home from school and told me that because she can't play with anybody or can't get to any structures, that she's going to take a book and sit on the playground and read a book by herself. And I think what's interesting is John had mentioned earlier, like ADA does not request that those structures actually be compliant or inclusive play structures. So she can get out to the playground and be on the playground, but the structures that are there do not allow for her to actually engage with her peers. These are some pictures of Magdalena at Anna and Abby's yard, which is an inclusive playground. And then also at Harper's playground with some of her friends. When she was in kindergarten, we had her enrolled in Peninsula Elementary, but she was in a learning pod with 3 other kids that went to Peninsula and also to Beach Elementary. And they would frequently go to Harper's playground where she, like I said, she can't get on that piece that they're on, but she can wheel up to it. There's like a paved path so she can get up there with them and then can go down and meet them at the bottom. They were throwing balls and things like that. So there's opportunity for creative play where she can still be actively engaged. And you can see they're happy that she's there just as much as she is happy to be with them. And then some more pictures at Anna and Abby's yard that just sort of show how things are designed and created so that this piece of, it's like musical instruments that allow for a wheelchair user to actually get underneath there and to be able to reach some of those, like the mallets or hammers associated with each of the instruments. And then the image to the far right is actually at Esther Short Park, which is a community park in Vancouver, Washington. And this is an elevated play structure, but underneath they've, put something under there that can be manipulated. It's a game that could be played with a peer or a friend or a family member. So even though she can't get to what is above, there's something down below for her to do with another kid. And here's another piece of playground equipment that is really cool. And I think this goes along with that theme and sort of the values and philosophy of PPS's approach to free play during recess, is that it's organic. That is actually like a little spinny cup for a kid to sit in. My daughter can't get out of her chair and get in there herself, but she can put her little stuffed bat in there and turn it around and spin with it and have just as much fun. So they're adaptable things. They're things that, a parent could sit in that with their child, or a child can put their doll or their stuffed animal in there. She could push a friend in there. So just thinking about the equipment that is on the playground in a way that it's not like she has to do everything that all the other kids can do, but that there's an opportunity for creativity and engagement at the same time.
And the surfaces for the wheels here is just absolutely critical. We could not do this with wood chips.
Just more footage playing of the musical instruments. at Anna and Abby's yard.
So again, I just want to really emphasize, like, these things aren't required in the Americans with Disabilities Act. There is a huge gap there, and the ADA is not filling an essential need for our students. So recognizing this, and after the ADA transition plan, we started an inclusive playground group, which involved community members like Sarah, but also our staff from PE, from special education, from other areas of the district, where we developed a set of inclusive playground standards that'll be documented within the forthcoming version of the SPEC. And moving forward, all improvements to playgrounds will be inclusive. And the way that we're defining that is that the coolest thing on the playground has to be accessible by everyone.
That's a great definition.
That typically means the thing that's highest up. So a lot of sloping surfaces, but we'll take it. We also included in this work a case study. So we looked at Woodmere Elementary School's Title I TSI. Part of their ESSA subgroups are students with disabilities. They currently have 2 students in wheelchairs and also a blind student. This is the current field. The travel distance, you can see, if you can see my mouse, yes. Kids come out of here, need to travel across this asphalt expanse, and then arrive at this play structure here. And in speaking with the principal, it largely reflects what Sarah told us about. It's students that rely on wheelchairs basically come to the edge of the playground and watch their peers play. So we wanted to take a look at this as a case study. We wanted to dream big. So this is what we came up with based on the standards that we developed with our community. And I just want to highlight some of the components here. So we have a continuous circulation path with a surface that's acceptable for wheels. We have a double slide or a companion slide so that students who may not be able to support themselves going down a slide can go down with a companion supported. We have a continuous path through all the major play features. We have cool down areas for kids that get overstimulated, where they can go for some refuge but not be socially isolated from the space itself. We have an outdoor learning space, and we have musical instruments. So kids experiencing some form of autism can go and express themselves, express their autism comfortably. We were dreaming big here, but if we were able to, for instance, implement 20% of this across our elementary schools, the impact would be profound. So I just want to summarize playgrounds here. So playgrounds are profoundly important for socialization and an ideal setting for social learning. They're also a really, really important public statement about accessibility.
Yeah, I might just add a little bit to that. I think also, the importance of kids being able to play on playgrounds together. And there are so many times where my daughter will see some really colorful, fun looking play structure and she'll want to go, and you get partially there and you realize that there's a curb or there's a set of stairs or there's all this other a series of barriers that are going to inhibit her ability to even get anywhere near the play space. As a parent, it's hard to witness, and she's, I would say, generally well adjusted to encountering those barriers and sort of finding another way to entertain herself, like a hula hoop and a wiffle ball. But that doesn't mean that it is right, and I'm sure that it is extremely disappointing for her. And also, I just think one thing that has really struck me, as I think about our experience at Peninsula, which is so focused on diversity and inclusion, and I love that about the school. But then when you bump into these architectural barriers that actually go against the values that we're teaching our kids, we unintentionally create a separation when we're telling them one thing, but what we're actually doing is totally the opposite. And I think about that a lot as a parent, where she goes to school and she learns all these things about equity and then experiences like something completely different when she goes and gets on a bus that is separate from her peers, which is different than what we're talking about with playgrounds. But I just think it's really important that if we have this opportunity to do this, something like this, particularly in a place of play, which has such a high impact on social development, not just for kids with disabilities, but for all kids. It helps everybody to learn and understand and to practice and experience the benefit of playing with all different kinds of people and to make friends with everybody is really valuable beyond school and far reaching into the community.
That's exactly it. So I want to shift the conversation a little bit, and this is going to be a downer. I apologize. We just got to. I want to highlight one area which is legal. It meets the requirements of the ADA, but we would not consider accessible, and that's Cleveland High School. So what we're looking at here, this is 26. This is Southeast Franklin, and this is 28. The primary entrance to the building, the front door of the building, is this orange triangle here. The accessible entrance for the west side of the building is this green dot. To get to the accessible entrance, the slope on Powell is too steep, so you actually have to travel all of this distance. So if you can just imagine how exhausting that would be using a walker, a crutch, or a wheelchair. When you get to the green dot, what you find is this. And as an architect, this hurts to look at. It's unacceptable. This ramp is a mess. But I want to just emphasize here that this is compliant. This is ADA.
But it's also, retrofit and jerry-rig, so that's one of the main reasons why we're fully modernizing all of our comprehensive high schools and working our way through the rest of our inventory, because, legal is not to say that anyone holds that as our ideal.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So just returning again to the transition plan phasing, as I said before, main level accessibility district-wide will be phases 1 and 2 and is covered in the 2020 bond. And then we're going to look to future bonds for multi-level access for middle schools and K-8s, starting with Title I, CSI, TSI, and focus option. And then phase 4 will be multi-level access for our elementary schools. I'll just speak a little bit about the rationale for this phasing. So looking at phase 3, in middle schools and K-8s, we have kids that are rotating between classrooms. So there is generally more movement that we want to support. If there are specialized classrooms on a second floor, for example, we want to make sure that everybody's able to access those. That's why middle schools and K-8s prioritized over elementary schools, where kids are typically in a homeroom for most of the day.
So just I could ask a question. So the board made a decision to put $33 million in the 2020 bond. And I guess what I want to know is, it looks like you're committing to do that work in phase 1 and phase 2. And so that's still $33 million. And on what timeline is that in terms of years?
That's it.
So the bond passed in 2020, and so it's so in 6 years, the 33 million will all be spent, and you'll have effective main level accessibility in all the buildings.
That's correct, yeah. So we need to touch basically every building in the district except for 6 with the 2020 bond.
And then the next increment, so you're saying it's going to be 2, even though they're in the same box, that phase 3 and phase 4 look like they're 2. Well, actually, I'm confused because one is a 5-year, one is a 6-year, and the next is a 7-year. Are those years married to bonds, or are they for something else?
They're a conservative estimate based on the sequence of elevators. So for instance, if we were to look to the 2024 bond, we would of course change that date and push everything up here. So looking specifically at the duration, we've got about 12 elevators in both phase 3 and phase 4.
So this is 3 or 4 more bonds?
So I would look to, there's nothing specifically tying us to a bond commitment within the transition plan. But I would look to phase 3 to fund in whole or in part in the 2024 bond.
Wait, say that again?
So the timeline would change significantly.
It would,
with it.
and that's not to say that we could start immediately, given staff allocation, all that stuff, but yeah, it's certainly fungible.
I'm sorry, I'm confused because I thought you said that, what I thought is that the bonds, that the primary funding mechanism is the bond, then it seems like the phases would be connected to the bonds, or am I making?
So I think this is more a potential timeline. It's not anchored on the financial components of the bond issue. So if he's now saying, we look at 3 and 4 to go to the 2024 bond, and that's a board decision on the prioritization of what fits in that bond, then those dates would move up, so they'd be sooner. But if it was in the 2024.
But it's also a
For
hybrid,
phase 3 and phase 4.
but it's also hybrid between pragmatic understanding of how we could sequence the work and the availability of the vendors and contractors to do the work, as well as access to the capital we need, whether it's from the bond or from the general fund or whatever.
So this is very preliminary and not to be extensive.
Yeah, again, well, I'm trying to see how it gets to the endpoint. Like, for example, if the board hadn't voted to put the $33 million in for accessibility, what would this timeline look like? Or was there some other plan? Is that, it wasn't in this,
It's
We had,
go ahead.
well, just that we hadn't completed our transition plan.
it just was stretched out longer?
Right, it would stretch it long. We wouldn't be able to complete them. We wouldn't have funding to complete phase 1, phase 2.
And then my other question, I love playgrounds because that's where I found my creative self. And the play structures at Glencoe are still the same ones I played on, just for the record. And that's super accessible. I love that idea. I'm like, is that baked in here or is that like on top of? Because I think it's like I want to buy that, and we need to buy this. So what is the whole thing, and is that incorporated in the transition plan? Because I think the basics is becoming accessible. This is like this foundation, and the other pieces to make it truly accessible are on top of it. And so what does that all cost? And is that baked into the transition plan?
The ADA transition plan is specific to ADA. I think John has more presentation to answer some of those questions.
It does, and so there are a set of legal requirements for the transition plan. The transition plan must only speak to the requirements of the ADA, the very narrow scope that we discussed here, because we are legally accountable to track and incorporate all resolutions to all of those documents. So within the transition plan, we need to focus solely on the ADA. So as I've said, we have inclusive playground work. We work with the community on developing those standards. Those are documented both within the long-range facility plan and within the district's head spec. We don't have any specific scoping requirements, but I would anticipate in terms of planning for the upcoming bond that we would develop those. If you would like to do, for instance, we have 45 elementary schools. If we would like to address inclusive playground equipment at 20%, this is what we do. But we need to do that within the specific budget amounts for bond.
And so the intent was, this is about the ADA transition plan, but we just want to give that additional context that ADA compliance and accessibility are not one and the same. And there can be very high value accessibility improvements. We're going to go after playgrounds, restrooms, acoustics, is another thing John has called out. that might be, as important or more important than some level of ADA compliance. So we just want to be able to give the committee that level of context when, instead of just hyper focusing on the ADA transition plan and people not understanding that relationship.
So I understand that it's a ton of work to just be responsive to this compliance obligation that we have here, but how much analysis or how much even explanation of the scope of those other issues have we done or will we do?
Specifically, so for example, inclusive playgrounds.
Like, well, inclusive playgrounds, but also, there's all sorts of improvements within classrooms in terms of accessibility that are not required by ADA, but are, humane improvements that we would like to make. I mean, there's a whole range of things, not to mention things that address disabilities that aren't manifestly physical.
Yeah, so I'll just say we have a long way to go. I think as part of our work on the SPED bond development, we've made progress on understanding what the gap is. So I think we're getting our arms around that now. I think what I would advocate for though is in addition to spending in future bonds on accessibility, we have continuation of the SPED scope of work or some more generic accessibility improvements. But to answer your question, we would need to look at that carefully. We are the farthest along on inclusive playgrounds. We have a pretty good understanding of what the gap is.
It's
And
a
it's
pretty
very
great
large.
place to start.
Yeah, it's a very, very big gap.
So just speaking as one individual board member, but also one who chaired the last bond, I would hope that PPS would have a accessibility plan, and underneath that, this is like one piece of it, because it's sort of, in some ways, it presents almost itself as like a false choice. Like you can choose the legal ones, and that may, and if we do that, we can do it faster, or we can do it slower, and we can add these other things which are accessible. And it's like I want them all, but it seems like we should. What's the most inclusive to our students who need our buildings to be more accessible is to have this overarching plan. I don't think anybody would like, yeah, we just have to do this. But I think it can't be like, well, we're not going to do this, we're going to do this over a way long period of time because we want to do all these other things that aren't planned. It seems like better to be, what's the big thing look like? And then this fits under it as the legally required. Or so maybe the floor, but it's not the whole thing.
I agree with that approach, and then that's something we can talk about, and we're happy to continue the dialogue with our community about what that looks like. I think the four things that I mentioned at the beginning, so playgrounds, access, acoustics, and I'm missing restrooms. I think they all need their own individual program plan. So we heard, I think, the loudest and the most consistently about playgrounds, so we got started on that almost immediately. And we're pretty far along. We have a capital plan for playgrounds. We have a capital scoring criteria. We have a set of standards. We're ready to go. We just need the funds.
And that's not the case with bathrooms. That seems like that would be like a pretty like foundational.
Bathrooms. So we make various accommodations for restrooms through special education. So special education, that the $13.4 million is going to accommodate that in part. But so just to back up and give a little context, the ADA requires restrooms to be accessible, and an ADA accessible restroom can be as small as 35 square feet, so it's 5 by 7, which does not work for a mechanical wheelchair with the movement, as well as some support. I would not say that those kids are unsupported in our schools right now. It's happening, but it's happening in teacher restrooms, it's happening in multi-stall bathrooms that are being cordoned off, it's happening in other ways.
So just, does the main floor accessibility, the 33 million, does it cover bathrooms?
It does, yeah.
Okay, I was
It
gonna
does,
say, like,
absolutely.
'cause
Yep,
otherwise
yep.
I'd be like, what are you
We're not going to get the 180 square foot bathroom at every site that we want and our kids really need, but we can do a lot better.
You know, the other thing that we need to think about is that, you know, we've been focused on our high schools for our full modernizations, which are outrageously expensive because they're so big. But as we get through that work, I mean, we'll have 2 more to finish out on our next bond. We'll be able to spread our projects more broadly. So we'll be able to modernize more of our inventory because they're not going to be $200 million jobs, you know. So that is another way, even if we're not just applying it to accessibility improvements, but full modernizations or significant modernizations that include accessibility. So that's going to become easier as we hopefully move forward with our bond program.
That's exactly right. I just want to end by acknowledging that 20 years is a very, very long time to wait for work that should already be completed. There's no other way to say that. This work should be done. Full stop. The 20-year timeline is a conservative estimate based on the expected duration of installing 24 elevators, and it really is just elevators. Elevators are extremely specialized construction type. They take minimum about a year to install. We have about 3 elevator manufacturers in town. So that supply chain limitation could potentially connect distinct projects, creating supply chain disruptions, which we're hearing all about now. This could easily cause an elevator project to be delayed for a year or more. So turning it into a construction site for over a year could be pretty rough. And then just to end the parallel accessibility investments like the ones that we talked about today could elevate the experience of our students in the near term while we continue to meet compliance.
We don't have anybody in here from special education, but Claire, you might know this. I mean, do we know how many students we have to reroute away from their neighborhood schools as their neighborhood? For example, the school where my kids went to elementary school got an elevator in 2012. But before that, students with any physical disabilities couldn't attend their neighborhood school.
There are, for instance, I recently visited a middle school that they actually moved as a wheelchair goes through different grade levels and there's multiple levels. They'll move full grade levels to the main floor to accommodate the wheelchair. As that, as another one comes through, they move classrooms around from floor to floor. So it's not really an ideal situation, but it really, it depends. We make it very individualized to the needs of the student. And certainly, I don't have a number in my head. Elevators are something that is needed. In my experience, is something that makes accessibility for all of our students a priority. I'm embarrassed even to admit that we don't have them.
Because it's not just about accessing the classroom either, it's about the cafeteria and the library.
It's the whole, it's not just students too, there's parents, there's staff members, it is not accessible for all.
Great. Do you have any other questions? We got to move on.
I do, about the 20 elevators. So, other than the 20 elevators, or the 24 elevators, are there other things that would happen that would take 20 years?
The elevators are the driver for that duration. They're by far the most expensive accessibility.
Yeah,
Are they like
but what I meant is, are you not going to do other things because you have like the whole argument like, well, when we do the elevator, we do X, Y, and Z. So by saying like the elevators take 20 years, does that mean the other X, Y, and Z are going to happen on that long time frame?
I see what you mean. So the multi-level improvements, like restroom improvements on like the 3rd floor. I don't know how we, John, you know how we estimate
So
that?
the multi-level, so improvements to restrooms on the 2nd level of a building without an elevator is grouped with the elevator for that building. We could move that up.
Mm-hmm.
Are we voting on something, number two for I'm gonna be in the same place I was before because I don't think the timeline has majorly changed. I just think the ABA passed a long time ago, and I am totally supportive of, we need to do more than the transition plan, but also, I think waiting another 20 years, and that's dependent on all the bonds passing, is too long for the basics. And I like the basics plus, so I would hope we have like a more robust plan, because I do believe that playgrounds would, in combination with a shorter timeline, make really measurable improvements for students. But waiting 20 years and then not necessarily even having a plan for the other things, I'm not inclined to support the longer timeline.
So is that, are you advocating the budget process for significant investments from the general fund? Or just say no?
Potentially. I'm gonna certainly work for the next bond and look to have more improvements, but I think also to be able to look for more, like you need a bigger plan, so having just an ADA plan, which is sort of the floor, I'm always a big believer, like, what's the vision, and then we can fund it, versus finding the funding and then having the vision follow in pieces, so. I think when people are inspired by the vision that they probably can do amazing things. That's what I think.
So since we are going to be voting on this one to recommend to the board or not, I would like to hear from anyone we have there available now, so that way we can hear from them before we decide to vote. Testimony, yes.
Yeah. I think we have everyone. And have two people, I have a video from students and one person on Zoom, and then we can go here. While I get the digital stuff ready, so my closing.
Thank you.
I couldn't hear you, sorry.
Hi, I'm Mike Rosen, and I'm the board chair of Northwest Disabilities. We are an organization representing 5,000 families, many of whom are students of Fort Worth. I am testifying today to ask the Facilities and Operations Committee to reject the draft ADA transition. The reasoning is simple. ADA was passed 31 years ago. Important disability community 31 years for accessible schools. This transition plan proposes that the disability community wait another 20 years for accessibility. My organization supported the last construction bond that allocated $33 million to make the first floor of our school fully accessible. We were told at the time that it would cost an additional $70 million. We were clear that part of our support was contingent on PPS finishing the job. Now we are being told this will not happen. So this is unacceptable to us. This plan must be revised to assert that the next bond is $70 million to complete the job, and that the work will begin immediately upon passing it. Finally, I want to take issue with the public outreach program implemented to seek feedback on the development of the draft transition. In the prioritization section of the plan, it says, and I quote, recognizing that the district has limited funds and cannot immediately make all schools fully accessible, district stakeholders and community members were asked to consider prioritization criteria. So before the process of creating the report started, the district misleads them. This does not need to be a process of prioritization. Racial equity, social justice, civil rights, and the law cannot be doled out at the convenience of the district. What the district should have said is that through the capacity of bonding, we can correct this injustice with due haste and help us plan for that justice. Thank you.
Thank you. Angela Jarvis Holden.
Hello, I'm Angela Jarvis Holland, and this photo is the signing of ABA 31 years ago. This woman's a friend of mine. She said, "Dear God, another 20 years," when I told her what was being discussed. I do not think it's appropriate to discuss the civil and human rights of people to belong in a law that was passed. And this is an ADA plan. And when we discuss an ADA plan and say, as a district, we accept 20 years, do we really reach for anything? Do we really have a commitment to equity? And the health disparities and racism of this country mean there are more people of colour with disabilities that are impacted by these decisions. And do you know what it means if you say that you don't have multi-level access? It means you systemize segregation. You decide that you will solve it by sending children with disabilities to the schools that are accessible. You further marginalize them. And the message it sends to the community is, we don't really care about people with disabilities. They do not belong. There are volunteers, there are teachers, there are students. You could have shown the video of the students that a student from Cleveland made, and you could have shown one that has my son who has a significant disability, who ends it by saying, "Finish the job in the next bond." I'm going to ask you to really think hard about what you want to agree to. An ADA plan is about ADA minimums. Yes, we want more than that. But that ADA plan, if passed, gives the opportunity, and there will be changes in hierarchies, in staff, and we will be back where I was 14 years ago, advocating again and again for the same can that gets kicked down the road. These are real people and real lives. And if you mean to stand for equity, you have to say, take this back and look at it again. 20 years and that timeline does not work. And yes, I sound very passionate because I am. And I don't disrespect any of the words of the parent here. The person that founded Parker's Playground went through a training of our organization to be learning about how to avoid the segregation that systemically happens in PPS, and is a friend of mine. So I think there was a bit of smoke and mirrors about us getting into other discussions. This is a legal ADA plan that would mean that PPS would have to comply with that timeline. And I'd like to see that timeline changed. Thank you.
I have a question about that point, Angela, because, this is a really difficult conversation because what you have laid out is rooted in pragmatism and sort of feasibility, because we can't make any commitments for any future bonds or any future decisions by boards that are different than our board now. But it's not my understanding that this would be a legal commitment. It's my understanding that what we have is, this is the minimum. This is the floor of what we expect. And I think with a little bit of, I would be happy to work on resolution on this, our board resolution, but I think with a little bit of more positive and visionary language about what we aspire to do, I think we can find a happy medium. We can commit ourselves to these minimal commitments, but also somehow express our intention to accelerate that work. But it's really tricky when we're talking about policy language, because we can't make any commitments for anything that's bond funded, and we can't make any commitments for future boards. But that said, I think we can really make it clear that this is our minimal expectations for how we're going to have an inclusive district. Do you want to disabuse me of any of that based on just the tricky bureaucratic compliance aspect of this?
No, I agree with that 100%. I would support that wholeheartedly. I'll just say, this is really challenging for me. My wife is a wheelchair user and photographed in many of the pictures here, and this is extremely challenging. This work should be done. But I think if we were to commit to doing this in the next bond, 2024, I think there is a very high probability that we would fail. And that's not based on money. It's market capacity. It's just We just,
Yeah.
we're running into manufacturing roadblocks. They're very real.
Yes, so we have Dr. Aisha Musa.
Hi, thank you. I'm Dr. Aisha Musa. My last name is spelled M like Mary, U, S like Sam, A. I hold a BA and an MAT from Portland State and a PhD from Harvard, and I'm addressing you today as a concerned, disabled, taxpaying citizen of Portland. My family has a history with the Portland Public Schools. My maternal grandfather was a teacher and principal in Portland throughout the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. In 1965, I was denied entry to my neighborhood elementary school, Buckman, because of my disability. We were told that I could only enroll in the Holiday Center for the Handicapped. My mother and I visited that school. I don't remember the school at all, but I'll never forget my mother's reaction. We got back in the car and she turned to me and said, "You're not going to that school. I would not send my pet pig to that school. You're going where you can get an education." We were members of St. Francis of Assisi Parish, and they had an elementary school. So my mother arranged with the priest and the school principal to cook breakfast and lunch 5 days a week for the students in the cafeteria, so my brother and I could attend. I share this story with you because now, nearly 60 years later, and nearly 50 years since federal law required public schools to provide disabled students with equal access to a high-quality education, Portland Public Schools is asking for yet another 20 years to provide that access. 80 years to provide access. Access delayed is access denied to yet another generation of Portland students. A vote in favor of this transition plan with the current timeline is a vote in favor of the continued segregation and marginalization of disabled students. That concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Yes.
And now I will share a video from Harley.
That's the student, right?
Yes. Carrie, do you know how I can make the sound go when I got all my things off? Sound on the video player is on.
It should come through the Polycom. Is it remote for playing back videos?
Hey,
Yeah.
You want me to try to run it through? I was thinking we turned the speaker off. John, while they're getting this organized, I have a question. So just to clarify,
Speaker's off.
the plan that's being presented doesn't have anything necessarily to do with.
Right.
Okay, sorry.
Is it support of the plan or?
You're gonna send it to all of us?
Yes. Ali was part of the group, if I may speak, was part of the group that created the video for the bond. She has a sister with a disability. The video included a teacher from the school from Cleveland that experiences a disability, and she's very disappointed to hear 20 years.
Yeah.
She's a student, and the person that did the video is also a student. So for me, as school board members, bringing that voice from people who are in schools was really important. So I appreciate that you're going to look at that video. As well.
All right, so I have a couple comments on this. I don't believe that this should be having waiting 2 years. I think the wording, like Director Thompson was saying, should be worded differently to show the urgency that we want to have, but knowing the realities of what's going to make those happen. And so I think if we can go back and kind of put those wording in there to show that we are urgent. We want to get this done, and we want to make sure we follow along. We want to make sure we do what's right by our kids. With the caveat of, but these are the steps that we have to go through, and a lot of the stuff is contingent on the funding. And if funding comes, then we can, like you said, we can be done soon. So I think that would be like the best course of action. So do we want to, do we want to send them back and come back with a different wording on that, or?
Are we looking at accepting the ADA transition plan as a board, just being briefed on it and accepting it, or are we being asked to vote on it?
Is there a requirement for approval or is it silent and just it needs to have?
There is a requirement for.
Oh, there is.
In
We
the
have-
department.
So we do need to vote on it.
That's correct.
So, and one thing that I would say is that this is a plan showing what we need to accomplish. And even goes beyond that in terms of what is important in terms of accessibility for our students and families. So, and then remembering that the board also has the decision-making process around putting bond packages together, right? So there's going to be much further discussion. I think all of us agree that we need to do this work as soon as possible. But this is not something that we want to have for our community. What we want is accessibility for all of our communities. And what we have to look at is logistically, how many elevators can we order in a year and receive them? Right? And how much do those cost, and how much of the bond package financially is that going to take? And so then the board will ultimately make that decision as we're putting bond packages together every 4 years on how much we're putting in for many significant programs throughout our district. So I don't think this ties our hands to a specific timeline. This is stating, this is what we need to accomplish and what we need to do in our district.
Okay, and so can we articulate that in the ADA plan? What you just said, I know what you just said, but is there a way we can articulate that in the ADA plan?
And I wonder if it's in the plan, or maybe it's in the resolution.
Or maybe a little bit of both, like for certainly in the resolution, and I'm happy to work on that. And it sounds like that has to be today if it's coming to us.
Yeah, I mean, you
tomorrow
can-
for next week.
You can vote it out of the community. I mean, I think if you have in the document, though, 20 years from now, I've been around PPS for 50 years and, staff and board members come and go. And I know, like, we had a first vote to put the 33, and I want to thank Director Constant for being the one other vote that first put the money in, the 33 million in, because that wasn't in the package. And that went down like at some midnight vote, and then came back and got voted in. So I worry about having a date and a transition plan that's approved by the board that says one thing, and then aspirational language in a resolution that may not mean anything or commit to anything. So,
But I think there's maybe a little bit of misunderstanding or misrepresentation about how it is characterized in here. I mean, I don't know if you do feel like there's an ability to revise some of the language to make sure that it captures our full intent, or
Yeah, so a couple of options here. So we could put a condensed timeline, 10 or 15 years, and commit to revisiting the transition plan itself prior to the future bonds. As long as we have that common reference point, that stake in the ground to guide us. What I don't want to happen, though, is to commit to a 10-year plan and then fail. I think that would be devastating.
both because we are unable to find the resources, or because we're unable to execute the work,
Yeah.
given the market conditions.
And one of the things that I kind of noticed on there was talking about the elevator piece versus the other stuff that could get to. So when I looked at the 88 and it looked like everything was going to take 20 years. And when I heard you speak about, but it wasn't really about elevators taking 20 years because of the market and availability. So it cannot be articulated as well as that way. Only thing we're talking about as far as the loan that's going to take a long term is the elevator piece, knowing that it's not due to, if we get funding, it's not due to the funding if we get it. It's mostly due to the labor and market piece as well. And that's make it a little bit clear, even for me, because I was thinking of too, like, for a long time, but when you talk about it, that's really just for the elevator. Well, that makes sense, because I know how the market conditions is around construction and employment and all that stuff. So if we can try to break that out and say, this is what that's where it is. The other stuff could possibly get done if we get funding or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
that's just as easy.
I would like to just point out, is the office that will do these projects at the bond. It's also the disruption in schools. So remembering that if we're trying to do, let's say, 3 elevator projects in a year, right? So let's say it's 3 schools, 3 elevators. Those are extremely disruptive. And so now we're thinking of schools of very substantial, right? And those are the things we want to take into consideration. And particularly when we're talking about working them together, we're also really looking at that disruption. So it may make sense to do restrooms separately from the layer because you're not going to disrupt school too much. Or it might make sense to do it together because they will disrupt it less by doing all of it at the same time. So I just want to say that logistics sometimes of actually doing the work and get it done. We're always trying to get it done as quickly as possible. Even in the constraints of those things.
That's the exact same question I asked maybe half an hour ago about the X, Y, and Z in addition to the elevators. Because it's just, not, and I don't want to diminish the elevators, but is it like the elevators in X, Y, Z? And I think when I asked the question, and I've heard it's like, oh, we can still do X, Y, Z.
Often we can. I think there's only 24 schools that need elevators, but there's probably more than 24 schools that need accessibility issues on the upper floors, right? So there are going to be projects moving forward in lots of other schools. The elevators are the ones that get moved. So that's the piece where it's going to say it's going to take less elevators because we know those elevators. There are other things that will take less time. And we'll certainly try to move as much forward as quickly as possible.
And that's something we'll talk about in the
have that information in the ADA thing, so that way people can know that some things can get done soon, some things can't. So, same thing that we can articulate that.
You can move a vote if you want to.
So do we have a timeline that the board have to vote on it at the board level?
There's no specific deadline, but what I think I'm hearing is let's make some changes to the language, not substantive changes, more directional changes. And then we can bring that back. And I think right now we're on the agenda for the transition plan, go to the next board meeting. We will need to pull that off, so we'll have time to develop a plan and then probably June.
So, Jim,
I think so.
that doesn't have an appreciable impact on.
It doesn't, and especially with the one now with the phase 1 and phase 2 of the plan, we're proceeding with that one.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Any other questions, comments around this? All right, let's get to thank you guys for the presentation.
Thank you.
Let's go to the parks intergovernmental.
Let's do that.
Yes.
Really quick.
Thank you, really quick.
This is like a super, no
Really
idea how
quick,
fast.
what you've been doing for the last 3 years.
Right.
Really wrap this up in 5 minutes.
You have no idea how much really quick I would like to do. Oh, that would be so great. So yeah, this is an update on the Portland Parks and Recreation AIG, was it? IAG. Collaboration agreement, whatever you want to call it. Okay. And so will actually be fairly quick. The purpose of it, as many of you know, is to provide both of us, PPS and PPNR, with accessibility to different kinds of assets. The current one expires at the end of this year. We're working for about 18 months on this. I think Marshall's actually on the phone as well. Cara?
Yes, I can.
Thanks. And so we spent about a year going through with a consultant, really kind of airing things out. I have to say the relationship between the two entities has not been good. And there was just a lot of anxiety and everybody convinced that they're getting the short end of the stick. So it's tremendously time consuming to go through all of the detail of that, but it was, I think, a really good thing for us to do as a team. So as mind-numbing as those meetings can be, I think they were absolutely essential. So what we have decided to do now is we have an agreement with Parks on our sports agreement. And we're going to go back to the way we used to handle this, where we bifurcated the real estate piece and the sports piece. So the sports piece is where we're at right now. That'll be ready to go to the board in January. It also has to go to city council because they'll pay us more than $50,000.
When you say bifurcated, you mean two
Separate
separate
agreements.
intergovernmental agreements,
That's
completely, not related. Okay.
Yes. So that's what we finished that first part. And of course, like I said, this is primarily for our benefit of our athletics department. I will go through, go ahead. Yeah.
Is this presentation also posted?
I
Can I see it in the materials?
don't.
No,
think
we
it's
can get
posted.
it. Yeah.
And can somebody just, if you know, just send it to me so I can.
You can send it to all
Yeah. Thank you.
I haven't, and maybe this slide gets to it, but I'm not gonna see the slides. So are the two things that are coming, to us, are they, about all the specific properties, or is it a larger, is it a larger framework?
So the first thing that will come is the athletic agreement, and this is all of our exchange of assets between the two entities. And all that detail, if you want to actually read it. Then we'll start working on the real estate piece in January. Because that is, as complicated as this was, that will be much more political and
Give me an
emotional.
example of the difference between real estate and sports, because a lot of it seems like it's connected to both.
Who's going to pay to improve Grant Park, when we don't, who
Well, also
access, right, the beautiful Cooch, that's on our property.
In which piece is each of that? So let's take Grant or Benson. So city property, PPS uses it, like Benson, you know, they're leasing it out to, you know, another school, St. Mary's. So is that in the real estate or in the sports?
That's in the real estate. So what the sports does is says, here's our agreement on how we're gonna share our assets. We're going to give you this many hours of pool, and you're gonna give us this many hours of fields, that kind of thing. We get into capital investments, and we've discussed not wanting to put capital into each other's properties. That's where the real estate piece comes in, because Benson's a great example of a huge problem that we have. Dan and I just met with Parks last week and said, we need you to commit to fixing this trail. This is so important. And, you know, they're in the same position we are in the sense of being able to commit future money, but they recognize that and they're willing to have that be part of our agreement. This is priorities to them as well. So I think we made that, but what you're talking about, when you talk about whether or not we are going to put money into something and have exclusive use or something like that, that would be part of it. The sports is really the here's a, you know, 50,000 hours that we're exchanging and all the places that we're doing. That's helpful.
So it's the actual agreement, the hours agreement.
Yes, yes, which will serve as our base.
So
So,
we can go forward and we'll become a little bit. more
yeah,
clear.
we'll see. One of the biggest things that was important for us to get was we had a bell schedule change from, we needed 4 to 7, which Parks felt was costing them, you know, at least $100,000 a year in revenue that they would be losing. But we were able to get that, and we gave them more access to gyms for volleyball and volleyball. Volleyball was not in the original agreement, and that's an important component for them. So I won't read through all of those.
Can you go back for
Sure,
just a second?
yeah.
What about specifically the clause in our prior intergovernmental agreement that was not honored by Parks and Rec, which gives public schools first right to taxpayer-funded park facilities?
So as we start to get to, right now, this is our balance, if you will. I want to say equity because it's not equal exactly, but the use of each other's. They have given us everything that we want that they have to give. So this agreement now says you're getting this priority. I don't know if that makes sense. So
Well, does it specifically address that clause, which is that if there is a need for a certain Parks and Rec facility by public schools, then we have first right to that? Because that was a specific clause in our prior agreement that was routinely not honored by them.
yes,
So that they could double dip.
I understand. I totally get it.
Actually, though, like, partly it was because PPS wasn't unwilling to make capital improvements. I'm willing to put money into like the Benson project. I was, you know, like St. Mary's came in and PCU came in and said, we'll put this amount in, and PPS was the last to the table. And, you know, they came in finally with some money and they got the time they asked for, but they weren't like first to the table. So I hope that we are matching we want to be first priority, but also that we're going to be making investment because past it was, there wouldn't be a field there, but for the fact that PCU, St. Mary's put money in.
I understand. In this agreement, what it will say, Amy, actually, is that if there's anything here that we cannot do, then we're going to make sure we do everything we can to provide something else. So if we have to kick somebody off of the field because PPS needs to move for some reason that happens with parks, then we have the priority for that. So we haven't gotten all the language completely down yet, so I'm guessing you probably don't want to see the detail of the language.
We keep going and see where we.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other things that came out of it were PP&R reduced their reserves on our fields by about 2/3, which was great, freed up a lot more fields for us. And we have agreed that while we're agreeing to that this is an equitable sort of sharing, anything that is direct cost will be paid. So custodial, for example, that's a big issue to them. So we've gone through the athletic staff on both sides and come up with these exchanges. And then this will be a 3-year rolling agreement so that on the second year, we're back to saying, okay, what's our baseline for the next 3 years? So that we're not every year going through hundreds of hours of, okay, we need Mondays and Tuesdays from 3 to 7. It gets really complicated. And it was so messy before that it was just a constant source of irritation for everybody. Marshall, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I wanted to, good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to add, back to Amy's point, because I know there's some very specific properties that we wanted, like Dunaway. And what we were able to do was to look at all our athletic programming across our system and they decide what fields we're going to use over this 3-year period and make sure we had what we needed in order to get our athletic programming done. In that, there are some agreements that Park Bureau does have where they, like Buckman, where they have agreements with outside parties, and we had to basically work around that during this one to the end of whatever those contracts are.
What,
If that-
how long are the contracts at Buckman and Dunaway?
I don't know how long Dunaway is, Kirsten, you may know, Buckman, they're on their last extension, they probably have another 9 years to go. Parks has said they absolutely don't want to do that anymore, but, you know.
9
so
years.
who knows? Yeah, not with big investments. They had an original agreement and it had an extension option, unfortunately.
And then the other part of that comment is that if there were places that they traditionally had permitted to someone else, and we were programming somewhere else, we weren't able to just go, we're going to take that from you. There was more like, okay, well, where were you using it? We want to make sure you get that and get to 7 o'clock, which was a greater priority for us.
4 to 7 shift was huge. We had to have that. So Marshall's team's done an amazing job, I have to say, on the incredible level of detail as is Kirsten trying to get the athletic agreement put together. So we're starting to draft that now. We're hoping that will go to city council and our board in January, maybe early February. It takes about a month to get something out of council, so it's longer than our process and needs to be approved by both entities. And we'll start working on the real estate use.
So Marshall, do you feel like this is an improvement?
It's significant. I think, as we said, being able to go from 4 to 7 with our late bill schedule was incredibly important. Also think that to be able to go to detail for each particular facility. So like at Pier Park, where we thought we might want to play softball in the past, we're able to go and look, okay, do we really want to play here? Okay, if we do, then what needs to happen? We got to have lights. How does that happen? Parks, can you do lights? I mean, we're able to go to that detail on the properties, which I think in my tenure was the only time we've gone that deep. So I think that was really, really good as well. And then I think the other thing that, well, maybe what the most important thing was that we were able to identify who was getting the best part of this deal. I think that was a really sticky point because we felt they were taking advantage of us. They thought we were taking advantage of them, but being able to go through the process, I think we were able to clarify that and then be able to move forward with some clear understanding about where we both are.
So everybody's happy because it's suboptimal for both of us.
Right, we're equally miserable.
Awesome. It's terrible for our students, terrible for the taxpayers. We're good.
It's like she wrote our guidance.
So just.
Amy, I guess I'll say one other thing. Now you guys got me going here. Is there are things that we didn't get, Amy, because they don't have it. Like we need more pool time, right? We need more turf fields that are baseball, softball. I mean, those kind of things they don't have. So we didn't get, but the things that we could get, I do think we got the majority of what we could have asked for in the deal.
I think both sides did. I don't think we have much more to give and neither do they. We use There just isn't the capacity in the city for all of the need.
And this is more of a political question, but you have an agreement with two elected bodies that have to agree to it. I mean, I'm just thinking.
Yeah, it's something fun, isn't it?
And like you look at it and then I'd be like, hey, my neighborhood, park doesn't have X, Y, and Z. And is it, how is it gonna be previewed, or is it just gonna be, here's the whole thing, it's like a yes or no?
I don't
It's
know.
not a trick question, I'm just like.
Yeah,
thinking
no,
through, like,
I understand. I have shared this. Yesterday I shared this PowerPoint, just this very high level saying, hey, we're starting to work on the language, but it's been going on so long, I felt like I needed to give you guys an update. And they'll want to, I'm sure, share that internally as well. How this goes to council, I don't know, like what their process is before that. Presumably there's some kind of education session or something before it just lands.
Yeah, and also with us, I'm just curious, like, will we get it and it's like, hey, here, it's all interconnected, so it's one thing. And you'll have time to like look at it and ask questions about it, and it's one thing, and the council will have the same thing. So I would hate to have it be like the school resource officer where like we got the agreement and then the city never approved it. Or it was just like it was lopsided, so like the mechanics of something that maybe is like has been contentious to make sure that we have a path that keeps it. Like we pass it and then they're like, hey, I want to pull out these 3 or 4 other parks and we want to do something different, and then we're like, but we just passed it.
Right. And so the way we're structuring this is the IGA that's currently in place, will extend that for several months so that we have that there. And then as we replace the athletics piece, we still have the real estate piece covered through that. All that stuff's expired. But I know what you're saying. I don't think this agreement will be that complicated. I mean, we'll have an addendum that like we'll show the schedule, so we really said this is it. But it's not going to be the specific of, hey, we want to make sure we have basketball this school or something like that.
I think what you're saying is we want to make sure that so tonight was just intended to be like, here's an update. We want to wade into the water. We're going to get you the draft as well, so you can provide comments before it obviously goes for a vote. But we also want to make sure we're walking hand in hand with the city. So we're not completely out in front of them. And so before maybe we have draft, we get some sort of feedback from them of, you guys testing the waters on your side that this is largely acceptable or if there's some deal breakers. Okay, that's fair. That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Any other questions?
Any more questions, no? Nope.
Well, good job.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
So we're at 5:30. There's another agenda item. Do we want to continue that, or because I don't want to be stuck with everybody's time, or do we want to postpone it to the next meeting?
I've got a short presentation I could go through, probably 3 minutes. It's basically the update that went to the board last week. It's more or less that, just providing some more context around it.
So can we get 3 more minutes from everyone to go through it? Okay.
So just a question, because I
Yeah,
did have a separate question.
Yeah.
So I did read the update. So is there some sort of contemplation at a certain point in time there'll be a board discussion? Or this is just like to elevate it in public, the board would much better than to elevate it in public?
Yeah, and there was a communication that went out this week. And then it was really just to make sure everyone understands where we are, kind of the context, the background, and then the process going forward, what that looks like. So that was the intention of this discussion. So like I said, I have a PowerPoint. It's a handful of slides. It's basically just pictures, more or less. I just kind of walk through the context.
We do have one more person trying to public comment who is here virtually. Yes.
All right, so can we hear them first, and then we'll go into yours, that way we can get them.
I'll tell you what, if you could do the public comment first, and then, and so you. Well, I want to be respectful of the person who's waiting.
Right, that's what I said, yeah. that's
And
what
I did read your, so if it's a repeat, I don't need
So
that.
let's
And I
go-
do have a question larger for the committee though.
Let's go with the public comment first. Here we go.
We have Cody Dickinson. Cody, you should be able to unmute now.
Yes, I'm here. Good evening. My name is Cody Dickinson. Last name spelled Dickinson. And I speak to you today as a sophomore student at Lincoln High School. I am here to address how the lack of equitable opportunities for student extracurricular participation and availability of recreational areas are due to the lack of multi-use field space within the Lincoln cluster. The impact of this reality is that there's a drastic effect on PPS sports. People are testifying about the current health and safety issues, but I'm testifying to tell you how the building of this field will help fix these problems. The implementation of this field will not only add a great facility, it will also improve the community and people around it. Due to the recent pandemic, there has been little outside engagement and unhealthy habits in our community. A multipurpose field and an easy to access space will develop interest in the community. I've experienced this firsthand. As a person who grew up in a community that integrated a multipurpose field, instead of staying inside, we would play outside. This integration improved our healthy habits, outside engagement, and got us more interested in playing sports. I think that this new field would have a similar effect. The field would cause more interest to go outside and increase the enrollment in local sports. This enrollment is very important to our sports right now. Many PPS sports have lost players and participation due to lack of facilities. I have 5 friends that have left Portland Public Schools for local private schools due to the availability of facilities and fields that other schools have. If we build this field, the community as a whole will benefit, as well as PPS athletics. I believe we can agree this is unacceptable. Your approval of the development of multi-use field space at West Sylvan to be completed in 2022 will remedy this issue for our community. Please take action now. Thank you for your service and consideration.
Thank you, Cody.
So I'm just I was just gonna say, so it's more of a question and staff can answer it later, but it's my understanding this is like being phrased like this is the surplus of like the funds would be used. But the 2020 bond had to cover $180 million that the 2017 bond was short to finish Benson. So I guess I don't understand how we would have any surplus because we were short 180 million for the 2020 bond. So I'm just, I'm thinking.
Hasn't been characterized as a surplus.
Pardon?
Hasn't been characterized as a surplus. There are unmet needs there on a variety of fronts.
Right, but I guess that's I'm thinking about, and this, and my, just full disclosure, I have a son who played baseball for Lincoln, so I've seen how bad Gabriel Park is, and I've also played on every other baseball field, been to every other baseball field in PILs, for 4 years. So I recognize the need. I guess I'm just thinking about the funding, because it seemed like it's coming out of the 2017 bond. And whatever it's called, it's coming out of the 2017 bond. My understanding is that we were $180 million short. So I guess I'm not quite seeing how it fits, but that's a bigger question since we're not voting on it tonight. But that's kind of what I want to see. And then I think about all the other needs in the city in sports, and there are many, of how we allocate, if it's being used, if it's bond funding, how we're going to allocate that.
Okay. Let's hear Dan's presentation. And then you might answer some of the
I just want to
questions.
respond to one quick thing, and Dan, you're very sensitive to this, I know, but one of the complicating factors in this conversation has been that people tend to conflate the long-term needs of the Lincoln cluster for athletic facilities with the commitments that have been made for swing space during construction, and the fact that there's nowhere to play, and so we do have an obligation. There's a difference of opinion as to exactly how that was characterized in the master plan. There's actually a discrepancy between the commitment that the district made to the community about swing spaces during construction and the way that it was explicitly articulated in the master plan, which is really unfortunate, but it's 2 different things. So we're not talking about investing from the 2017 bond in the long-term needs for the athletic facilities in the cluster. We're talking about the commitment that we made about swing space.
I'll watch your answer. I'm kidding.
Like a radio caller.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Just a meeting to go to.
I'm going to run through this quick. So at the last committee meeting, we heard public comment recommending improvements at West Sylvan to support Lincoln athletics. We just heard it again. Plus, there's been some recent email and other communication conveying the same message. And so committee members who have been at PPS for a while know this is a new issue, new topic, and staff has provided updates, did a couple times back in 2020, and then just again recently last week, but we thought it'd be worthwhile to review the topic again tonight. So I want to start with a little bit of context. I want to go through this quick, and then it'll make sense in a minute, I hope. Big picture context, PPS modernization projects start development of a project-specific master plan. Master plans are effectively the marrying of these items here, PPS's education specifications, along with community and stakeholder engagement, and existing site conditions, building conditions, and school programs. Master planning process is very in length, but typically they're about 3 to 6 months. Master plans are ultimately approved by the board and effectively align the project scope, schedule, and budget. And more to the point, what master plans do is they define the project parameters and then direct the project team to go and design and construct the project as approved. The project teams return to the board if there are any significant changes in the scope of work from what is approved in the master plan. Touching on each one of those 3 items very quickly, our education specifications are also approved by the board. PPS has developed ed specs for various school configurations, including high school, middle school, K-8, and K-5. And the primary function of the ed specs is to identify the number, type, size, and function of each teaching and learning space. So think number of science labs, size of media centers, etc. And ed specs are really the master planning jumping off point. Existing site conditions, unique school programs, these things necessitate deviations from the generalized ed spec guidance. And the final project-specific master plans, those denote the deviations from the ed specs. Community engagement and stakeholder engagement is exactly like it sounds. During master planning is when this engagement kicks off earnest. Notably, it's when our public-facing design advisory groups are stood up. Those groups include the school principal, students, parents, community members, the school alumni association. Typically, there's business and neighborhood representatives. Board members are part of it as well, and more. And then feedback obtained from community and stakeholders helps shape the project and master plan. And then finally, existing conditions and school programs. So each school program, building, and campus is unique and must be carefully considered during development of the master plan. And in-depth discussions with school staff and district instructional leaders begins in master planning but continues throughout the course of the project. So now getting closer to the point, Lincoln, like all the modernizations, has followed this process, and the board approved Lincoln Master Plan in August 2018. And like all master modernizations, Lincoln's master plan does not align perfectly with the ed specs. Certain aspects of modernization are below the general ed specs. For example, number of open flex spaces and outdoor athletic facilities are below the ed specs, whereas other areas exceed, such as the dedicated resting room, the photo lab, and dark room, are just some examples. Of course, there's always robust discussion around these trade-offs during development of the master plan and the approval. Swing space, getting closer to the point, is an important component of all master plans, and swing is a term that we use to refer to activities that are displaced because of construction. And notably, I think this is where West Sylvan enters the conversation. But construction by nature often causes service impacts, and the bigger the project, often the bigger the disruption. So for schools like McDaniel, Franklin Grant, and Benson Polytech, construction disrupted the school's operations completely, requiring all of those schools' activities to move off-site to new locations. Lincoln was in the unique position that allowed the majority of school functions to remain intact with minimal disruption by remaining in the old school building while the new school was constructed on the site of the old track and field, which you can kind of see here. But removal of the track and field for construction caused those activities to have to find new locations during the build. Generally, to determine the best option for swimming activities, modernization project teams work closely with department and school staff to identify, analyze, and coordinate the temporary relocations. For Lincoln Track and Field, there's no one perfect other track and field out there to move all the sites to. So a variety of options are currently being utilized, including Reiki, Hamilton Park, Wells, Wallace Park, and others. Initially, West Sylvan was viewed as a potential option for some field swing sports. And I think mostly it was for practices and I think workouts as well, not so much for games. However, to use West Sylvan, improvements were needed to extend the hours of use. And to namely, what we needed was lights, so we could extend the hours of use. There's some minor fencing considered as well. Installation of new lights required a conditional use approval from the city of Beaverton. That's what the school is. And this, I think, is really the starting point of the confusion and some of the conversations about West Sylvan. As required, the project team submitted a conditional use application to the city of Beaverton in early 2020. Eventually, Beaverton planning staff recommended approval of the conditional use. The planning commission agreed and it was approved. Subsequent to that approval, the West Sylvan Neighborhood Association appealed the decision to City Council. The Neighborhood Association generally opposed the project, and their aim was to limit the use of the fields. So staff, we attempted to work with the Neighborhood Association prior to going to City Council. Ultimately, it did go to City Council. They approved the conditional use, but they added conditions of approval onto that. This decision materially changed the usability of the field for Lincoln Athletics and added significant costs in the form of required right-of-way and site improvements. The combination of less usability and additional costs caused a devaluation of West Sylvan as a useful swing site, and the team then turned their efforts to other temporary locations such as Reiki, where we do have temporary field lights. Now, really to the point. Separate from the Lincoln Modernization Project, there's been ongoing discussions about the lack of permanent facilities at Lincoln for some outdoor athletic programs such as softball and baseball. So West Sylvan had been considered a potential site for a permanent location of these programs. In an effort to provide additional information regarding the validity of using West Sylvan as a permanent home for Lincoln Athletics, the land use application that was submitted to the city of Beaverton also included athletic improvements not associated with the modernization project, including a synthetic turf field and softball and baseball field furnishings. So no funding was identified for this scope and no schedule was set for the improvements. And even though staff was clear with Beaverton planning staff that this is a two-parter, where the first part is funded, the lights and the fencing, the second part is not, ultimately that detail got lost in the broader context. Wrapping up. So just to be clear, currently there are no improvements planned for West Sylvan, neither the short term, the lights and the fencing or swing site, or the larger build out. As I noted earlier, this is not a new topic, and there is clearly some support and community interest in improving West Sylvan for Lincoln's use. So there is a potential plan moving forward. There are two relevant factors here. There's no identified funding for the West Sylvan project, and the project has not been authorized by the board. But the plan forward is this. The Lincoln Modernization Project team, led by Eric Girding here, it has been asked to take a look. Let me back up. The Lincoln project, Eric, is currently progressing well, but there is still a lot of risk out there with the volatile construction market, with the supply chain issues we've seen. There's still plenty of risk in the project, and it's still got, say, a year and a half or almost to go, maybe more, for full completion. But we have asked the team to take a look that as it nears completion, if there is savings within that project that could support some or all of the West Sylvan improvements, the Lincoln Modernization Steering Committee will convene and they will discuss, and they could recommend that those budget savings be spent at West Sylvan. And to be clear, we don't know that yet. The earliest that we think we would be comfortable with saying that there will be savings would be next summer, but that could certainly change. We are seeing the market act and change and react rapidly right now. But in the event that there is savings and the committee does make a recommendation to allocate those savings to West Sylvan, the board can authorize the allocation of those. Questions?
Yeah, so we talk about the savings, from the modernization. So those savings can be used to add to the West Sylvan expansion or modernization for the field, for the multiple field. Where else can that money be used for? Can that go back to like a general fund for contingencies on other projects or?
It's a great question. So the funds can be used for anything that, I don't know if Marina wants to tackle this, but anything that the bond language allows. So generally when there are savings, what you're going to do is you're going to want to hold on to those funds to make sure that the projects that you have already approved, you want to make sure that those get completed so that at the end of the day, you complete all your projects that are from the bond. But the bond language is relatively broad, and so it can be used for other purposes. And for scope that is not approved or specifically identified within the bond, the board is who would make the decision of how to allocate those funds. Marina, I don't think.
Yeah, and I do want to say too that there's a compensability issue related to the use of bond funds. So those would be suggested when we review with our finance folks to make sure that we are within the definition of compensability, which will look at things like the scope laid out in the original bond measure. We'll also look at ensuring, for example, the capital improvements as opposed to maintenance work. So different things that can factor in. The biggest issue, of course, is staying within the scope of the bond.
To your question, Gary, I mean, historically, in the couple of times where there have been contingency funds available, the two things that the project teams look at are where were their value engineering decisions that were made maybe early on that we could possibly build back things that had been cut. And the other is where's there a real deviation from the ed specs, like Dan was talking about, like where is it clear that this project is not meeting our ed spec? And is there anything we could do to address that at this time? We don't have to belabor this. I just want to react to a couple things in your presentation, Dan. One is that you kind of tried to wrap it up pretty neat and tidy that the conditions put upon the West Sylvan work by the city of Beaverton devalued the potential for that site, and that's not at all how it's perceived by the community or those who are involved in athletic programming. It did limit the hours, but it would still add considerable time and field use possibilities for student athletes. So it did not eliminate the value of what those improvements would mean for student athletes.
Yeah, just to agree with that point, when I said the devalue, it was specifically looking at what West Sylvan was used for swing purposes, where they needed those later hours because it was in the darker months. So,
but even within that, it still adds to it. But anyway, I think there's a real disagreement within the community that there absolutely have not been equitable accommodations made for athletics swing uses during construction. As we heard from a lot of students and families, really inequitable, untenable, and unsafe conditions that students are being put into if they want to participate in athletics during construction. Maybe on paper, it's like send them here for this, send them there for that, but it doesn't work. It's not working. And that is a commitment that was made. It's really unfortunate that those of us who had eyes on it back then, way back when, weren't more diligent about making sure that the master planning language was very specific about what those swing accommodations would be, because now that's being thrown back in the face of the community saying, well, we can't do it because it didn't specifically say that these improvements would be made. So yes, it's great to see that the project team wants to look at, whether or not that long-term value can be added in late in the project and it's fully within the range of appropriate uses. That doesn't do anything for the student athletes who are, being denied a reasonable way to participate in the meantime during construction, and that's really perceived as a broken promise in the community. So, I mean, personally, I've been trying to respond to people about what this situation is. I've been trying to advocate for people, and it's there have been more roadblocks on this than just about any issue that I've worked on, which is kind of ironic because a lot of them are really more on the face of them, much more serious. So I don't see a path forward for the district to meet its commitments to student athletes during construction, and it's very uncomfortable and sad to be put in a position to have to just admit that to the community. Like, sorry, we through a combination of very difficult, lack of resources in that area, which is nobody's fault, and a lack of commitment and foresight for the district on how to address it during construction. You're just, out of luck, and we got kids on the freeway coming from 8 miles away at 11 o'clock at night. So good luck with that. It's kind of where we are, unless somebody decides that it really matters.
Thanks for that.
Anyway,
I
that's,
understand.
yeah.
My daughter was in the same position, even with the Benson piece, and her, even with the move out to Marshall was an inconvenience for her. And so we moved, so I understand it, I get it, the whole facility piece, that was another reason why, because the facilities at Benson wasn't conducive for her to thrive. And so, we had to send her out to Oregon City and to Sandy for her practices and all that stuff. So I totally understand and I appreciate what you're saying. Is there any other questions or comments? Marshall, you have anything that you want to say?
We can't hear you if you're talking.
Yes. Well, first I laughed and said, Gary, why'd you call me out? But okay. I'll do that. Well, I think I don't want to diminish the fact that, I guess I want to take the opportunity to again reiterate that as we've done value engineering, as we've done these projects, there has not been an investment in athletics. And so as Amy's talking about West Sylvan, I think that it's a part of the bigger question of, are we going to make a commitment so that our kids are not leaving to go to private schools because they get to be in nice athletic facilities? Are we going to make sure across our system that we have equitable athletic facilities? So when we have the phenomenal facility at McDaniel, but then at Roosevelt, we didn't finish. At Grant, we really didn't finish. At Franklin, we didn't finish, right? And so it's almost like we did this great thing, almost great, right? Lincoln's going to be phenomenal, but we still didn't take care of athletics. Roosevelt's fun, but we did. And I just hope that we can see that has to change, and this board will make that commitment. The second thing I want to say is that, Amy, I concur that this is a very unfortunate situation, and that hopefully as soon as possible, we can figure out how to, it's not correct or wrong, but make sure that we don't get in this position again in terms of the details of language around projects, because the collateral damage is immense in the Lincoln community. And then the last thing I'll say is, as we look for the investments, we are looking to add middle schools to our athletic portfolio, because our middle school program has over 5,000 kids, almost the same amount as we have in high school, and we're sharing with the high school facilities. In our long-term facility plan, there are 8 middle schools that we're asking to be complete. And I do think that whether it's today, whether there's a decision, or in August there's a decision, or when long-term we do need to make sure we do have those 8 middle schools, of which West Sylvan is one of those schools that we think needs to be done.
Awesome, thank you. Any other questions, concerns, comments? Awesome, well, we will adjourn. Thank you, everyone, for spending extra time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Trying to end this.
Have a good night, everyone.
Have a good one.
Hi, Dan. You still have a minute here?
Yes.
You want to go upstairs?
Yeah, where we going? That's fine.
Let's just go in the, here, so we're not here in the dark basement.
Okay. Basement area.
Airless
I didn't like
basement.
that. I was kind of worried. I don't know if you gave up our spot up there. I like our spot up there.
My
Got
thing doesn't
windows.
make mine is a bar down there, I told you what.
No, I just, you know, there are bigger fish to fry, but it's one of those things that it's like, we should have been able to fix it, you know? And
You preach it to the choir. Yeah, like I don't understand why bitches still don't have a track.
I know.
You know, it's just.
I actually, it's funny, 'cause I regret not encouraging more of a conversation about athletes in the last month.
Yeah.